I personally think investing is not a desktop job. It's a belly-to-belly job where if you want to know how things really work, no one knows better than the operator. What is written in an annual report is what the company either wants you to know or is required to disclose.
Welcome to The Art of Quality in Attention, a podcast that explores the ways in which master practitioners attend to their craft. The quality of attention plays a huge role in how we perceive and experience the world. By exploring how master practitioners pay attention in the context of their work, we hope to shed light on the inner game of seeking quality in work and life. I'm your host, William Oliver. Dear listeners, it is my pleasure to bring to you this episode of The Art of Quality in Attention, where we sat down with Nadim Abdallah. Nadim is a professional investor, a dear friend, a former colleague, and the objective of this conversation and why I was so excited to have him in was to talk about his fieldwork process. His practice of fieldwork as part of the investment research process. Nadim has spent more hours than most in the trenches studying businesses through conversations with operators in the field. He has a love of the game, a love of the work. It is infectious. And he's learned a few things that we felt were valuable to a broader audience around how to conduct fieldwork in a mature, responsible, and professional way. We hope you enjoy this conversation. Nadim, it is a great joy to welcome you to The Art of Quality in Attention. I am very happy to be here with you.
Pleasure is all mine.
And what a treat it is to speak to a friend, a colleague. We worked together for a couple of years. And today, I would love to speak about, of the many things I'd love to talk to you about, one thing stands tall, and that is your journey as an investor. And I have a lot of respect for, and I've come to, as we've gotten to know each other more deeply over the years, I have a lot of respect for how seriously you take the pursuit of the truth and what that means in the sense of intellectual humility, patience, and many other good things. And we're going to get into all of that. But I want to, so let's start in that vein with your experience of how you would look at a company in a more traditional hedge fund environment, let's say 4 or 5 years ago. Let's start with that, how you would study a business. And I think over time, throughout the conversation, we'll get into your background and how you got into those things. But I just feel like it's an exciting place to start, to look at how you would, and what you thought was, I guess, like a real process, a proper process, a competent process to study businesses. And we'll get from that into how you do that now, because I think a lot has changed.
Yeah, that's so true. So much has changed. Whoa. I mean, a typical analyst in a typical investment fund or money manager, the way you want to call it, is pretty, like, they have pretty standard processes that are shared. I had the chance to be a part of several, like, different funds that share the same approach. And if you look at the typical day of an investment analyst, he'll probably start, like, his starting point would be either an internal screen, a tool, that the fund has put in place to surface ideas.
So to be clear, we're talking about a day in your life 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's either a quantitative or like they would have like large baskets of, I don't know, a couple of hundred names they have accumulated and put under a watch list that you can pick and choose from. Or in some cases, the fund manager would come and basically ask you to look at something. And from that moment onward, the clock is ticking. And an investment analyst, in a way, ultimately is paid to give a recommendation to the fund manager on a certain investment decision. And so, like, you would go and start reading annual reports, basically looking at like industry reports. Eventually, when you get a bit deeper on the name, maybe schedule a call with experts to kind of cover different angles, and then come up with a very neat, tidy report about what the company does, some financials, the risk, and then you would go and pitch it to the fund manager. But like, I would say the real issue here is that because you're expected to deliver something within a certain period of time, you never follow the truth about how the business works as deeply as you should to take concentrated long-term bets.
And so if you look at what's changed from that typical, experience that you've just described, that I think a lot of people, or is very common in our industry, because I mean, as I know you and I know what you work on, I know that you get a lot of stuff done, right? And I know that there's a number of industries, a number of businesses that we worked on together over the years. I named just a few of them: Carvana, Credit Acceptance, Wayfair, Old Dominion, Main Freight. I think Main Freight was the first business that we worked on together. And so you're getting stuff done. I mean, I imagine that you're as productive as you've ever been. And as I've known you, you've always, I think one thing I've always respected about you is that you've managed your own money in a way I would describe as professional. And you do manage that money in a concentrated way. And so what does your process look like now? And if you could pick out a couple of experiences, insights that led to whatever changes in your process, we can explore now and talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to look at things, to compare how I did it before and how I've managed to evolve. I think that the number one thing that changed is, and because you brought up the term productivity, is to really, when you look at a business, understand what really matters to the long-term story of the business. And it's something to write a 15 or 20-page report about the business and what is said in the annual report and the different segments of the business and the competitors and the margins and the risks and the valuation table. I think like everyone can do this because the information is out there eventually. But I think what is much more difficult, if I project myself 7 or 10 years later, what is much more difficult and valuable is understand what is the one or two things about this business that really matter. And maybe I'll use an example to describe what I mean. So if you look at Roger Federer and the number 200 tennis player warming up before a game, and you know nothing about tennis, and you don't know who's Roger Federer and who's number 200, can you actually know who's the best player of all time versus the number 200 just from the warm-up? It would be very difficult because both can hit the ball above the net with a certain degree of consistency, and everyone can see this. Translate this to looking at a company, let's say Credit Acceptance, that does subprime auto loans in the United States. I mean, everyone could tell you what Credit Acceptance does. They give Like they facilitate loans to people with poor credit scores for like to enable them to buy cars in the United States. But knowing this is not enough. What I found is an angle that really mattered when studying this business is, well, actually, knowing that credit acceptance is a subprime lender, is credit acceptance a predatory lender? And what is very interesting is when you ask this question, two things happen. Number one, you would realize that you have a very disparate view on the market, a very binary view. Half of the market, or more than half of the market, would tell you that it is a predatory lender. And those who like the business would tell you that actually it's not. And the second interesting thing is that it's not written anywhere. So you can't really read an annual report and answer this question. You can't even ask ChatGPT this question and get the answer. And I actually did this exercise before I jumped on the podcast just for fun. And if you ask ChatGPT is credit acceptance a predatory lender, it would tell you that, of course it is. And I think this is a good segue to the fieldwork methodology and the depth to which you would want to go if you want to like invest in businesses, like doing concentrated bets, is that as part of in practice, I remember I had to go and figure this out on the ground. And I mean, I'm sure you'd want to dive into this. I'll let you tell me how deep shall we go. But I mean, I think this is how it really evolved. It went from knowing generally what a business does to knowing what really matters that is not necessarily known, not necessarily written, not necessarily out there, and going and finding the truth about it through fieldwork.
There's a line that I love from an American entrepreneur called Steve Blank, and he likes to say, there are no facts inside the building. And that struck me. That felt like something to take seriously. And I think it's in part because there's many ways to look at things. And typically, there's a range of legitimate perspectives on any given issue, right? The world is not black and white. The world is very rarely black and white, let's say, right? And very rarely binary. It's shades of gray. And the things that really matter might not be immediately obvious, or they might be actively hidden, right? Companies with power try to avoid antitrust by saying they have less power, and companies with very little power are constantly talking about how they have unassailable moats, right? And everything in between. And so what you're talking about, and I feel like our relationship, I mean, it got off to such an explosive start, right? In many ways, it was so enjoyable, so very rapidly fruitful, and was marked by intense collaboration as you joined our firm in this revelation that one, and I'd love for you to speak more about this, that what does it mean to study things in an open-ended way, to not have to force yourself to have opinions within a predefined set of time. It's not to say there was certainly an invitation to have working hypotheses on things, but to withhold judgment for a while. I'd love to talk about that. So studying things in an open-ended way. And the second is, what does it mean to actually get out of the building and go out and listen to people? And how has that changed your life? And how has that changed what you feel is knowable? How has that changed how you think about building conviction?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to your question. The first one is, what does it mean to study a business in an open-ended way? I think, without being too theoretical, it really comes down to a question of humility and accepting that you know actually very little sitting behind a screen. And I personally think investing is not a desktop job. It's a belly-to-belly job where if you want to know how things really work, no one knows better than the operator. What is written in an annual report is what the company either wants you to know or is required to disclose. But sometimes what matters is, I think most of the time, what matters is found in the field. So open-ended starts by, I don't know. Let me go and figure out. I don't have someone telling me that I should have an answer in a certain time frame, because this could eventually push me to rush my answers and not get to the bottom of things, which is increasingly dangerous, especially when you're allocating capital. And this means when you have these two conditions of, one, I don't know, two, I'm not obliged to know in the next month, then you can start doing serious things on the ground and becoming dangerous on the name. And this is where in my opinion, the real work starts. Real scuttlebutt, like Phil Fisher would call it. I mean, it's hard to get car dealers to talk to you. They know better than you do. They don't have time for you. I remember when we wanted to talk to car dealers who work with credit acceptance, we reached out to more than 100, and we got only one answer that we managed to nurture, and eventually it opened up an entirely new network for us of people we could even text, like, for them to answer our questions. And then when you become like close enough, I mean, we got to the point where I was sitting with a car dealer and he was literally sharing his screen and running me through how he structured a loan for his customers. Where is this found? In annual reports, in conference calls? No, it's found on the ground, as you said, outside of the building. And then it becomes it's not a matter of, I think this is right, or I think this is wrong, or I believe this, or I believe that. It becomes a fact. When you see how things work, you become much more powerful because you actually know the reality of things. There is no layer of subjectivity. There is no assumption anymore. I saw him decrease the retail price of a vehicle, and I saw credit acceptance pay him more. I want to say that I and you guys, and in our report, we have the tangible proof of how the business works, and we were able to answer in a binary way whether this company was a predatory lender. And this only happened through fieldwork.
What is it? Because this has fascinated me for years, is like all the things that get in the way of that, and how easy it is in our industry to skip these processes and just rely on opinion after opinion. And you could see people like going out and speaking to a lot of people, but never getting into these procedural mechanics of how services are delivered, how exactly products are made, how exactly people buy things, why exactly people buy things, especially if they're complex products. What's your journey been like into that world of complexity? In a way, because I think you're talking on the level of, whether it's, I'm sure we'll talk about a couple of businesses today, and you've reached that phase of the simplicity on the far side of complexity. Right? You've gone into the world, you've exposed yourself to a wide range of opinions through trial and error. You've met increasingly better and increasingly reliable people over time. You've been able to benchmark their competence, let's say, in this scuttlebutt process of speaking in every case of businesses you've worked on with distributors, customers, suppliers, competitors, former executives, regulators where relevant. But let's get into that, of getting into the field and what that looks like, and what resistances come up when you're, as a practitioner of this work within an industry where the culture is not to do this, or to take it very seriously.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think a lot of it comes down to what are your incentives? If you are in the business of, and I'm going to tie this to your first question about how I used to do things, work in a certain environment, and how I'm doing it now. If you're incentivized to convince someone, whether on the positive side or on the negative side, you just lost the game already. And when I say you lost the game, your judgment is automatically clouded. If your PM asks you to look at a business and you know that he likes it, or you like it, or you dislike it, then and your entire point is trying to prove to him whether he should invest in it or not, there is a certain level of subjectivity there that defeats the purpose. Pull me forward 7 years later, and I remember during my 2.5 years and in practice, I was never asked what I thought about the business. Actually, the only thing I was asked is to go out and figure out the truth about how it worked. And so my incentive to come back to this was to surface something that eventually could have been misunderstood, but not surface it through my lens. Surface it through a real lens, an unclouded lens. And fieldwork is the path to this.
When you say fieldwork, so take us through, what does this actually look like? What does it mean to do this well?
I mean, I always
right, because
found
anyone can go out and do 100 calls. That's what I mean, right? You speak to people all the time, and they're like, "Yeah, I did 100 calls on this. Like, I have, I know how this works." Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's easy.
Yeah.
Or I read 80 Tigis transcripts, 100, 200 transcripts, right? And maybe 200 from Tigis and like 3 from In Practice. Right?
Yeah.
and now I know, right? Or that you'll like, what's up with that? And like, how do you think about quality in this practice?
Yeah, I think there's an increasing number of calls out there and libraries where you could find hundreds and hundreds of transcripts about the company, but does it really matter? Again, it comes down to this question of, before I go on in the field and spread my energy around, did I actually found something that actually is unknown and that matters? Because if it matters and it's known, then probably people have figured it out, right? And then if it doesn't matter, then what are you doing fieldwork for? Right? So it's a combination of it should be unknown and it should matter. So that's the first step. And then don't underestimate this exercise. I remember having the back and forth with like all the like team members internally in trying to figure this out. Like what is really unknown but matters. And then when you have this in mind, then you can go and target who you believe are the people who can answer your questions. And most of the time, I found it to be like not the most senior people. I understood a lot more from about Tesla from repair mechanics. I remember like the project took 9 months for us to understand why repairing Teslas was much more expensive. And the answer was only in the hands of the mechanics who actually did the work. So going and finding the right person or the right people is the second step. And then I would say the third step, and which is as important, if not more than the first two, is knowing which questions to ask and how to ask them. Because it's very easy when you're paying someone to do a call with you to make him tell you what you wanna hear, and if he's smart enough, he'll know how to do it. But it's very different to surface the truth because you are putting the expert or the Tesla mechanic, for example, in a situation where he's comfortable enough telling you what he really thinks, and then asking him to prove what he's saying, to give you tangible information. And I would say the final step would be to kind of separate what has been said out of bias versus what has been said out of truth.
So there's so much in there, right? And I actually want to touch on almost every category that you've laid out, from what to focus on, to who to speak to how to find who to speak to because and I want to give our audience like a bit of quick context that's important here. So, I mean, Nadim, you've had, you had 2.5 years of doing around 50 to 70 hours of live interviews, and those would have been published on the In Practice platform. But outside of that, you're talking about hundreds of hours speaking to experts, building relationships, pre-qualifying experts, getting to know them, and in some cases ending up in almost constant conversation, a regular conversation with a handful of really interesting sources in and around, or let's say in the ecosystems in which the businesses that you studied existed in, right? And for our audience, those businesses, we mentioned a couple of them, but you've got vertically integrated e-commerce, or clusters of work in vertically integrated e-commerce, trucking, LTL, the auto industry, and value chain. And I say all this to say that, this context feels really important, because I think another evolution that I've seen in you that felt very powerful is this approach to studying things in context, right? So if we go to the beginning of this process, it's, I've witnessed you and the depth of your understanding of how things work be massively enriched by taking this whole idea of value chains very seriously, basically. And I wonder what that means to you today.
Yeah. I mean, I did not experience how powerful it is until I actually took the time to study the entire chain within an industry. And that's a great point, because most analysts would focus on a business that screened well, that is in one part of the chain, and then end up understanding this part of the chain very well. But there is something about like understanding the different stakeholders and how they interact and why they interact, and what is the interest of each person and how much they capture in terms of like how much power do they have in the value chain and how much economic power they're able to capture. And the reason I'm saying this is the moment you understand this and you're in an interview about like regarding one part of the value chain, the number of connections that like come to mind automatically because you could draw links between the different stakeholders is extremely powerful.
Well, let's make it real if we can, like Wayfair, for example, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to understand, the extent to which Wayfair is adding value to stakeholders in the business. Like, how did you build conviction around that? And by the way, that's with the disclaimer that I'm sure anything we talk about, I'm sure, is going to drop by 50% next week.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just putting that out there to diffuse any sense of hubris or cleverness that we might feel for anything that's happened over the last few years. And but with that said, like, take us through, how did you build an understanding of how Wayfair, like, of whether Wayfair is actually interesting or not, and whether what they're doing is relevant or not?
Yeah. So Wayfair is I think is a very interesting case in terms of studying an entire ecosystem. the way I approached it is, and just for background for our listeners, Wayfair is a two-sided marketplace that sells furniture online. So it's heavy and bulky items. And the company has built this entire proprietary logistics and transport network to enable its suppliers to forward place the goods in Wayfair warehouses and deliver them quicker, cheaper, with less damage to the end customer. And the case was interesting because we had the overarching question of if this solution seems a win-win to the customers because he gets it cheaper, faster, with lower damage, and to the supplier, given that if the customer is getting a better deal, then he's probably going to sell more items. Why were the warehouses of Wayfair not as utilized as they wanted it to be? So I remember it was like the utilization rate for the warehouses were around 20% for some time. And we went on the ground to try and understand why. And I started with the supplier. So someone who would sell items on the platform. And I asked him to take me through the journey of a single item from the moment it is manufactured in the plant in Asia up until the point it arrives at the customer doorstep in Arizona. And as he was explaining to me how the unit flows through the Wayfair ecosystem, I was able to find pretty valuable insight. Tangibly speaking, he basically, like, his argument was, yeah, we don't store items in Wayfair warehouses because Wayfair charges us a certain dollar amount per square foot per day, and it's very expensive. So we store them in our own warehouses. And the thing is, when I asked him where his warehouses were located, they were actually, like, they only had one warehouse in the United States. So my follow-up question was, okay, well, if you store it for free in your warehouse, then how much do you pay for transportation? And that's where, like, he did not necessarily understand that what he was paying for transportation was much more eventually than if the good was placed closer to the end customer in a Wayfair warehouse that he paid for. And the reason I was able to show him this was because I studied the transportation and less than truckload industry for some time to be able to understand the average cost per mile and etc., and help him get to the holistic equation of the unit economics. And the insight we got was, well, most Wayfair suppliers are small, like, family-owned businesses who do not necessarily understand the entire chain. And because they own something, they own a warehouse, they would use it without looking at the entire picture and linking it to to different parts of the value chain, like transportation, like ocean freight, and basically understand that, okay, you might be saving a couple of dollars here, but it's costing you a lot more here. And I was able to understand this because I studied the less than truckload industry and was able to link it to the Wayfair value chain.
And then there's a layer of understanding, because I've also seen you over the years get more and more interested in the extent to which a business is embedded in a web of multi-party win-win relationships in an industry, which I think is interesting because it speaks to the right of a business to get a lot bigger in a sustainable way. Right? Is the ecosystem rooting for you? Do you deserve to get bigger? Or does the business have to force its way, sort of knife fight style for every percentage of market share? And, and that's another way to build and live. And that's a thing in itself. But there's something of momentum that can carry businesses where they are, where on balance, the ecosystem as a whole is winning. Like they're actually doing something really useful for more than just one stakeholder.
Yeah, and it's, like businesses and investors usually like when there is an inherent lockup in the ecosystem. I like my personal opinion involved in that what's more powerful than a lockup is customers and suppliers actually enjoying working with you and wanting to work with you over the competitor and basically becoming at the service of the ecosystem rather than being the 2,000-pound gorilla no one can avoid. I found the former to be much more powerful because when stakeholders want to work with you rather than have to work with you, they automatically give you more business. You grow more. When there is a competitor that comes with a cheaper solution, they won't necessarily win your business over. You actually like build stickiness out of loyalty rather than out of
Force.
brute force. Exactly. Or leverage in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that it seems the application of brute force in itself creates fragility over time, that inhibits durability and the likelihood that transactions will recur over extended periods of time. But so back, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself. But back to the quality in the fieldwork process. Like we've talked about value chains. We've talked about how the work on the value chain gives you a feeling of what to focus on that might be interesting. You then have this procedural element of going how the unit flows through the chain. You then have a procedural component of who to find to have that conversation, who is believable, and there's a discipline there to really figuring out like who actually can competently talk about this part of the process, and then this part of the process, and then the next part of the process. And I think you, of all people I know, you take all these steps very seriously, and you've refined your I think your capacity to work through these steps over the years in really effective ways. There's then, and this is, I do feel you're unique in the skill you have in building relationships in the field. And once you have a sense for what you're looking for, and you find people that you think are relevant, that you think have a high chance of being relevant, of being, we could use the words believable. They have their circle of expertise directly covers what you're seeking, right? And that in itself can actually be pretty hard. But there's that whole relationship building side. Like, what's your philosophy of building relationships? Like, why would people want to spend time with investors?
Yeah, I found that the most powerful approach.
I mean, by the way, outside of the obvious, like you can pay people money, right?
That's, of course, of course,
to be very clear, but
yeah.
That there's a transactional element to that, which is limited.
Yeah. I think what's more powerful than paying them is asking them, how can you be of help? I found my most enduring and strongest relationship, and the ones that opened the most doors to me and reinforced my network, was with people where what they actually wanted was not necessarily a check for a 1-hour call, but something bigger. I'm going to give you an example again on Wayfair. So I remember talking to one supplier, and she was like, we're struggling with this feature on Wayfair, and we feel we're not heard. And my approach was like, okay, how about the work we're doing? Actually, our end goal is to pass it along the management of Wayfair for them to eventually understand what your concerns are, and for you to eventually for your business to strive on the platform. And the level of involvement that came following this was tremendous. She's just referred me to other suppliers who had the same concerns and problems. And I remember when we published our work, we got a call from one of our subscribers, and these people are very close to the Wayfair management, asking us if they could take what we wrote and bring it up to management. And we said, of course. So eventually we were in a place where it wasn't really purely transactional. Actually, the transactional part ended up being secondary. We're in a place where we were helping the stakeholder, in that case, the supplier, get his voice heard, which eventually could be beneficial to the company too. So the moment you come, like you tackle the problem from, okay, let me try to be helpful rather than let me try to extract what I want to extract. Like anything, you become a servant of the ecosystem, and people just want to work with you and share with you.
Like a few people that I'd say a few people really understand this and appreciate this, and it's led to, I think, beautiful things happening in their lives. But predominantly, the industry is extremely transactional in the way that it deals with experts, and I think people get the results that they get, which are very often limited because they're extremely transactional, and they expect practitioners in the field to just open up because you throw $500 at them or whatever, or 300 or 700 or 1,000 or 2,000, right? And actually that financial transaction is typically actually one of the lowest value add problems, especially for really good people, right? For a sort, there's a profile of expert that's really, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's just that they go out, they have a certain knowledge, and they're really trying to monetize that knowledge aggressively. And they're using, and those are typically the people the networks love to put forward, right? These people want to consult. They're very available. They can do calls quickly, right? And what you often find is that they're leveraging, they might have had a few years of experience that might have been relevant a few years back, but they're very good at packaging it. And they're, and those are the kind of people that are responsive to these transactional invitations, right? And then you have the people that are really valuable, for whom $500 or $700 or $1,000 is one of the lowest value problems you can solve from them, because they love their work. They're making plenty of money because they love their work, or maybe they're more junior but they love their work, so they're busy, right? And they're not available around the clock, so the networks struggle to work with them, right? That the offer of a fee for their time is not really that exciting, and that actually because they're good, they have a ton to give, but they'll give that on the basis that the interactions, there's a mutuality to the exchange, let's say. And that's where climbing that, I know we've spoken about this for years, but this element of like the hierarchy of needs, right? What do people want? They want cutting edge knowledge. They want, we talk about people, capital, and ideas, right? And then you have the fee, right? But I wonder, for you, how do you frame that today in terms of thinking about how to meet higher value needs when you're doing field? Is it as simple as, I guess, the way we've just laid it out, right? That there's that hierarchy, or how do you think about that now in your work?
I mean, it's like, I think of any meaningful relationship as something that could compound. So I would say it all depends on the game you're playing. If you want to get a certain data point on a certain industry, and you want someone to give you this number, then maybe, paying him $500, interviewing him for an hour, you'd get the answer. But I think the game we're playing is a bit different. It's a lot different, actually. I think the game we're playing is, we want to be part owners in what we believe to be potentially great businesses over the very long term, and understand them as they evolve. So the nature of our game is longer term. Like how, and then the question becomes not, what do I want to know today that will help me make 20% on my investment, but how can I build a system around me where information flows for the benefit of the ecosystem, for me to be able to share it with management, with the expert, eventually benefit myself, and because I understand the business, I've been following it, and I know who to talk to answer X or Y question. And so the nature of the game is just different. And the moment you start playing a long-term game where you want to follow something and study it, whether it's an industry or a company, for very long periods of time, then you quickly understand that like short-term incentives are not the answer necessarily. And what you want is actually be as useful as you can be, because people will give it to you back in kind.
I mean, we've done this long enough to see these feedback loops really build into very beautiful and extremely rewarding partnerships in so many ways. And I still think it's underappreciated today. I mean, I guess as the folks at Berkshire have been saying for a long time, or Buffett, that you can explain what you do and nobody really cares, right? Because most people are not thinking over extended periods of time, or they're in this sort of frantic game to turn over as many rocks as they possibly can, and in the shortest possible period of time. And then there's this approach, or this world that seems to open up, that I feels like a lot of people don't even know exist, of like, look, studying things as systems, of trying to pick industries that are going to be interesting over extended periods of time, and there's wide varieties of opinion on what's going to be interesting for a long time, and all of that notwithstanding, this basic idea that you can just pick things you find interesting, study them for a long time, get to know them deeply, and then just trust that opportunity will arise, and that price in some part of the value chain for some asset is going to move in your favor and allow you to build a position at relatively low risk. Or just the world that opens up when you've got time, and when you can build networks and build relationships. And I watched you for a couple of years. Like, people send you stuff. I think a lot of people, they're so conditioned by the ubiquity of these networks and how cheap it is to speak to people, right? Or how cheap it is to read 100 transcripts, right? And the cost per transcripts has collapsed and all that. And it's seemingly good, but it's like people are just completely miss the chance to build deep relationships, and to build relationships in a way where people send you information, and nothing that you shouldn't receive. It's just people tell you like what's going on, and because in large part, and especially if you've been useful to them, and they want to help you, and they want to do stuff with you, and so that orientation to adding value, I mean, I've seen it with you, and I wish more people understood this, and it's why I was excited to have this chat. I've been excited to have this chat with you for a long time, is that your way of working, which is in large part the way of working within our firm, is like, I'm shocked that it's not more, well, maybe I'm not shocked that it's more widespread, because you really have to be oriented towards a lifetime's work, and you have to have a structure that allows you to be patient, and you have to encourage intellectual humility and all this stuff that people like to say but no one likes to do, or even if they did want to do, they don't have a structure that allows for it, in large part because they've taken money from investors that really preclude them from saying they don't know, or that they don't have an opinion on something, or that they might want to study something for a few more years before they have anything to say about it, and all these things that are impossible for most investors to do. But I've seen it really change your life for the better, your quality of life, your joy at work, your investment performance, and that's been pretty cool. And that's been, I mean, has that shocked you, that, I guess, looking back 3 years, and from 3 years ago to today, just how much information flows to you? Is that a surprise, or does it just feel like, well, of course?
Yeah, I mean, it's positively surprising, because I think most people don't believe that giving first and trusting that things will come your way. Like, I think they believe it in theory, but they underestimate how powerful it is in practice. But really, and I don't want to underemphasize how difficult it is to have this setup. I think you alluded to it, but having a setup where you can work in an unconstrained way, asking questions, and have all the time you need to actually find the truth.
With an unlimited fieldwork budget.
Yes, and building relationships with experts is hard. Like, you need the capital to back it. You need the environment that allows it, that is not in a way pushing you to publish pieces of work because you have to. And it's not an easy thing to do, but the moment you do it, the moment you're in this environment and you go and put yourself in a position of service to the entire ecosystem, it's positively surprising how much people would want to work with you and share with you. And yes, like it changed my life. It changed my life for the better.
Well, and I mean, it's changed your life. It's changed my life. It's good people hang out with good people. And if you're useful and in service and like genuinely rooting for their success, the good people introduce you to all their friends. And those good people's friends introduce you to all their friends. And before you know it, you're embedded in a web of relationships where everyone's giving more than they take. And it's more than, I mean, it's a nice way to live. It's a beautiful way to build. And I'm excited that we get to continue doing this for the rest of our lives. So Nadim, thank you. Hopefully this will be one of many conversations we'll have over the years on the subject of quality. I think we've barely scratched the surface of the work and your love of this game and how you practice it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our conversation today. For more resources on the subject of quality across the domains of business, investing, psychology and art, please visit our website, theartofquality.co.